Welcome to Policy RX with the Rock Doc. I'm Eric Murdoch, coming to you from the doctor's office in Estes Park, Colorado. In this episode, we are featuring Chris Schulte. Chris Schulte has been a professional climber for many decades. He is a poet, a writer, a philosopher, and most importantly, an iconoclast who's been part of the climbing culture for a long time. Chris grew up in Texas. He's lived in Colorado and spent loads of time in Switzerland and France, and is now holed up on the east side of the Sierra. Welcome to Policy RX, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's good to catch up. Been a minute.
Let's get into it. So I've been reflecting a lot on what we collectively accomplished in Washington, D.C., which culminated, obviously, in a new law, the Protecting America's Rock Climbing Act, which really saved tens of thousands of climbing routes in 28 different states, including Yosemite and the Diamond and all sorts of wilderness areas. And you had a front row seat to the whole thing. When you first started going to DC, when we first asked you to join us in DC to share what it is to be a climber with Capitol Hill, we were introducing the idea of the importance of climbing, the importance of America's climbing legacy to Capitol Hill. And to you, you were learning about how you pull the levers and how does this all work? How do you go to DC and make change? Can you talk about your first time in DC when you were introduced to the strategies and tactics that everyone uses to make laws and to change policies and to push back and support on different things related to recreation and public lands and climbing? What were you thinking? And why was it so profound to you that you kept coming back?
Well, I got to say, first of all, something that surprised me and I think would surprise any climber out there is how much goes on behind the scenes and how much is actually required of any representative who's going to go up there and chat with these folks. It's really fast paced. The days are super full, but at the same time felt really it felt hands on enough to the point where I was super happy to be there because it actually felt like I had a chance at doing something rather than just kind of like shouting into the void or, resharing some post from somebody or another. So the actual hands-on and face-to-face experiences that we had there, it was really kind of bolstering, kind of uplifting. It gave me a little bit of hope because I don't know. I think the average person, when we think about the overall machinations of our political and governmental systems, like I think a lot of us feel pretty removed from the whole process. I want to say probably more than 90% of us, the biggest involvement folks have is, thinking about voting for 6 or 8 months, once every 4 years. But really what it is, what really kind of came home to me, especially on the first trip out there, was that there's no one single meeting. There's no real quick, lay it out, handshake, all right, we're done. It can be kind of a grind. You can really think to yourself, all right, cool, we've got this button down, whatever it is, only for it to come up in a different form, even 6 months later, something to that effect. So for me, one of the biggest things that was brought home was that it's an ongoing thing. Participation is constant and, not to be too hard-nosed about it, but it's kind of mandatory. And yeah, it was, like I said, for me, it was motivating. It was really nice to sit down with another person who actually has the hand in shaping policy, who has the hand in making all of these markers, in checking all the boxes on the lists to make sure that this area gets protected or this bill does or does not go through, whatever it might be. And well, especially on the first trip, I feel really lucky to have had yourself just a few steps in front, kind of leading the way, because it was, yeah, it was a little bit disorienting at first. Like I said, fast pace, very full days, and gosh, the process itself was something else. If you've got 12 meetings lined up in a day, and you're not always gonna end up meeting with senator or congresswoman or congressman or department of whatever chair. You're not always going to catch them themselves. There's a decent chance you might be meeting with a staffer in a hallway or something like that, and you're like, wow, we just ran halfway across DC in the rain to make this meeting, and I'm not really sure, like, is this really having the impact that I hoped it would? And maybe 6 weeks later or something like that, you get an email that says, "Hey, I heard your spiel, and I'm on board with it. Thanks for coming by. We appreciate you, and you've got us on your side." The showing up and getting actual feedback was a big deal for me. It really made me, who can be a bit of a Luddite in a number of ways, it really made me take a little bit more stock and have a little bit more faith in our overall political processes going up there, and just really getting to dig in face to face with all of these different people, and officers, essentially elected officials. It was good.
I thought that your timing was interesting because you started going to DC before the Forest Service and Park Service introduced their proposal to prohibit all fixed anchors in wilderness. You had sort of developed your style before then. And I knew you were serious because you started showing up with like really nice suits. I'd look at my like blue uniform, my navy blue suit, and you had this sweet tailored suit every time. So I knew you were coming to really play.
I don't know about tailored, but
So after you'd been there a couple times, and then we went, and then it became really serious. We weren't expecting the U.S. Forest Service and the Park Service to propose to prohibit all fixed anchors during the Biden administration. What were your thoughts when that news came out? I think you might have been in the room when the agencies shared that news with us.
Yeah, for me, I don't know. After you go a couple of times and you hang around with folks such as yourself, you hear some rumors and whatnot. You hear kind of the slow crawl of how things are progressing or regressing. Sometimes it can be like a mudslide. Like all of a sudden there's just a drop of water too much, and the dam breaks, and all of this just muck just starts rolling downhill, and everyone's like, wait, what are we talking about here? I thought we were going in a completely different direction. Honestly, I feel like I feel a little bit lucky at that time. I felt a little lucky at that time because yeah, like I said, I was sort of happy to be in what feels always like a pretty fast-paced, anything can change environment. In a way, it was just kind of like, well, this is how it goes. Here's another challenge. Like, you can't know. There are myriad departments that we talk to all the time, that we interact with, that we reach out to, that we have back and forth with. In a way, you kind of just can't be surprised at anything that comes up, even if it is this huge blindside, broadside. Like, that's just kind of how it goes.
Maybe that's why it's an advantage to being a climber, sort of being able to deal with these weird, tricky situations and just rolling with the punches. But after the Forest Service and Park Service came out with that, you were in DC, and we had scheduled an evening session where we invited a bunch of congressional staffers and DC insiders. We had kind of a packed house one evening. And it was sort of our job. We all knew it was our mission to socialize these ideas of like why Capitol Hill should care about our issue. There were so many other things going on. We knew that we wanted this needed to be a bipartisan issue. We had to compel both the Democrats and the Republicans that this is something that they can get together on and push back on, which they eventually did. But before that was even in play, but when people were just getting introduced to the idea, you go up on stage in a small townhouse in a small setting. Everyone had drinks and was sitting around and didn't know what to expect. And I asked you to share a slideshow and to sort of explain to people what the value of climbing is. And I said to you, Chris, you got 5 minutes to talk to all these congressional staffers. This is the beginning of sort of this next movement in the campaign. And you were up there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes maybe. And you were going into the history of climbing. And then you started talking about Texas and guns and just went off. And people were getting really nervous. And I was getting nervous. And then in the end, I realized this was the best thing that happened. People are going to remember this. And that really set the stage. people in Capitol Hill knew about climbing even more than they did before after that. You got covered in the DC gossip rag after that. I remember the next day it came out and it had a big impact on people. It certainly made people uncomfortable. And I'm wondering what was going on. How did you like what were you thinking when you had that opportunity and how did that play out? Or was it just kind of stream of consciousness?
Man, maybe a little bit of both. I remember you set both of us, Colette and I, up with a 5 or 10 minute slot to throw out a slideshow. And true to form, like my very first slideshow as a athlete or ambassador ever, I went way over time. If I remember the offices that we were in with some of our friends and partners there, it was kind of a little bit of a wine and cheese deal. Yeah, all of a sudden here I am up in front of what felt like half of DC trying to explain what climbing is in terms that maybe meant something to them. But really what I wanted to do, you got me there. I don't remember talking much about guns, but I do I do remember wanting really desperately to connect these folks that work within this full-time political sphere. I wanted them to connect climbing to the outdoors with a capital O, Remember really what I wanted to do is to connect the perception of climbing to the rest of the outdoors. Because honestly, like as a user group for many, many years, climbers have taken a whole lot of pride in being sort of outliers and a little bit weird, a little bit rebellious and whatnot. And in some ways, that can make a lot of us feel a whole lot holier than thou. And that doesn't really play with the majority. We live in a democratic constitutional republic, what have you. When it comes down to appealing to people, you kind of have to remind them. You have to focus on a majority, and you have to remind them that we are in many ways a part of that. So for me, in that moment, it was super important to make that connection. That we're out there. Some of us like the way I came up climbing. I didn't just there weren't really any climbing gyms at that time, especially where I lived. So the way I came up climbing was it's something that you sort of arrived at. You started camping, hunting, fishing, whatever it was. You did outdoor stuff, right? And then at some point, you almost like either stacked the skills that led you to climbing. Yeah, maybe I'll say it that way. I think. And so it was a lot different when I started climbing than it is now, where you can live in some massive metropolitan area with six gyms to choose from, and you go in to just check it out one day, and a pair of shoes and a bouldering pad, and you're a climber. But yeah, to to cut to the meat of your question, I just really wanted to sort of connect us all, anyone who enjoys the outdoors, who utilizes public lands, who participates in kind of, to me, the best part of this country is kind of the freedom to walk around and be in some of these places. That's one of the most important parts to me, anyways, is to be able to get out and get away. And I wanted to put ourselves as climbers sort of in the same box, on the same level as this huge pool of users out there that folks are a little bit more familiar.
Yeah, I think everyone in the room felt like they were part of something, like an insider group, that they were exposed to something exciting. So I think that everyone in the room really felt like they were part of something special. And I think after that event, there was just a better understanding of why climbing is important to our country, why this interesting climbing history is something of value at that regardless of party, people should support and remember.
You know, can I interject there
Yeah.
for 1 second? You reminded me of something. I did, in that particular presentation, really try to focus on the history of climbing in the United States because, at the time when this package first came up that said, hey, we're going to prohibit fixed anchors, which means everything from, a bolted belay or rappel to like piece of webbing around a rock or a fixed nut or something, you know, an emergency rappel gully or whatever. It was so ludicrous to us. You remember? Like I remember saying to you, this is ridiculous. Why are you even worried about this? This will never ever happen. We've been climbing in this country for over 100 years. We're just going to show them a bunch of black and white photos of American rock climbing history, and they'll be like, "What? We can't do this." And it turned out months later to not be like that at all. We kind of got a little bit close. We cut it pretty darn close, didn't we? So I do remember really trying to, in addition to bringing climbers into the wider user group, the wider perception, I also wanted to really set us a foundation historically to say, we've kind of been here longer than any ideas that you may have here in prohibiting these things.
So you've talked a lot about the history of climbing and maybe some of the changes, but I'm wondering what your perspectives are because you've been climbing for probably close to 4 decades. What do you think is most profound about the changes in climbing that you've seen? And then also, the core of climbing in a lot of ways has not changed. And yes, there's some differences in the way people look and the styles of which people climb, but perhaps the core, the foundation, what it feels like to be out there. And I think that's the reason why folks like you and I are committed to being lifelong climbers. What are your thoughts on how climbing has changed and what stayed the same?
That's a great and huge question. I want to say just off the cuff, one of the biggest things I think that has changed about climbing, sort of going back to what I was trying to build on earlier, is that accessibility is so different now, isn't it? Like you can be 6 years old and go climbing indoors and experience everything from like bumbling up the multicolored routes that the holds feel like kind of like crayons to walking over here and doing, getting on, touching the starting holds, trying a World Cup level route, and it's right there and it's right in your face, and anybody can do it. Whereas when you and I came up, you sort of arrived at climbing, like I was saying, you did this and that, and at some point you found some dude or whomever to like literally show you the ropes, sort of a mentor who would take you out and make sure you didn't just, kill yourself. I had a mix of that, honestly. I had a couple of mentors, but I only found them after I took my copy of Freedom of the Hills and my meager rack and got myself in a lot of trouble a few times. So yeah, one of the biggest things, I think one of the biggest changes in the last, let's call it 20, 30 years, is the accessibility of rock climbing to just about anybody. You can go in and you can figure it out for, a price of a $20 day pass or something like that. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty neat. We always talked about, I've worked with a number of companies for a lot of years at this point, and one of the focuses is one of the foci. I don't know, we're not going to get too Greek here, is the expansion of climbing, of sharing this cool thing that we all do, that we're so into, that we dedicated our lives to it, and honestly, gyms have done most of the heavy lifting in that department. Like, people can just roll in and check it out and see if it's for them. Which, pluses and minuses. I am a little bit of a crusty trad dad in some ways, even though I am a boulder mostly. I do stylistically, aesthetically, every now and again, I'm like, well, man, it's too bad that there's so many people out there that think of like climbing as some kind of after work CrossFit type of thing. But I don't know. It's not like it affects me in any terrible way, I'm gonna say. But yeah, accessibility, I think, is one of the biggest changes. And accessibility is going to give rise to popularity, which, wow, climbing's in the Olympics now, and that's, to me, that's kind of a mind blower. And that changes kind of a lot of things in a few departments, everything from marketing and needs of companies for professional athletes and ambassadors, the focus on gyms in certain areas, and just what the overall trajectory it is for this entire sort of subset of climbing. There's people that they they spend 90 something percent of their time indoors training or just having fun or competing or whatever. So that's interesting to me as well. I never would have thought, having definitely come up outside, that there would be such a huge division of people that were entirely focused on plastic. Now, having said, how has climbing stayed the same? I mean, it's almost the same answer. Accessibility and increase in numbers is gonna, it's really just gonna, as you expose more people to it, you're just gonna find the same people who got into it for the same reasons you did. I guess the difference and the same, it really all depends on your perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And your slot in the timeline of climbing. So, I'm heartened in a lot of ways by seeing folks, especially through, let's say, social media, because I kind of live in the middle of nowhere. So most of my contact with people and what they're into these days is kind of through little clips or videos or movies or magazine articles or something like that. But I see folks out there and kind of a growing number of them as well who they're into it for the same reasons that you and I got into it. Like they appreciate being outside. They appreciate going to these places. They appreciate the aesthetics of a line. It's not just the movement. It's not just the difficulty. It's not just the whatever it is. List the reasons. But it's bolstering. It makes me feel good to see that there are more people than I thought who are into it for same old reasons, like what better thing to do on a nice day kind of thing.
Let's wrap this up in the same way that we wrap up every episode of Policy RX. You got anything going? Any projects, any trips coming up in the near future?
Man, summer has summered here on the east side. I live just about half an hour from South Lake Tahoe, kind of I'm on literally on the California-Nevada border. It's in the yard right here, about 100 yards away. But it's getting hot, and I kind of just sort of maybe put a pause on a boulder problem project I've been working on since last September. Really low percentage move, just really weird party trick, no-handed techie slabby dyno to a sloper that's so bad it's hard to hold just in isolation, just to like hang there on this thing. A couple of weeks ago, I did the move finally and did the mantle and was like, here we go. And then it got hot. Maybe putting a pause on that because I can't seem to get up early enough. It doesn't matter at this time of the year. There is no early enough to catch cool enough temperatures. I don't know. On one hand, I'm kind of watching the weather to see if there's a cool front moving through. I might go give it a shot, and then again, I might just wait until September and see how that treats because it's fairly tall. Slipping off the sloper on the top is pretty jarring. So I might just wait till it cools off. But otherwise, in 2 weeks, Jess and I are going to Chamonix and Fontainebleau. We're going to spend a couple of weeks sort of bouncing around in the mountains. Her birthday is coming up at the end of the month, so we're going to hang out over there for a little bit. And gosh, after that, I guess the nearest thing I'm looking at, I'll be out in Indian Creek in the Bears Ears this autumn to drop by with some of the Access Fund crew and hang out with those folks. Don't know, maybe you'll be there as well. Drop in, stack a few rocks, build a little trail. Who knows? Maybe even do a little top secret bouldering tour or something like that.
Good luck on the project. I know you're always in it for the long haul. Thanks
Yeah.
for thanks for joining us on Policy RX. It was really interesting talking to you. And as I told you before, I think one of the values of this show is that we're able to memorialize all of these stories that really played a significant role in getting the Protecting America's Rock Climbing Act passed. And I think it's really important that we make sure to keep these stories in mind so that future generations can reflect back on what it took to do this. And you certainly played a large role. So we're all really appreciative, not just at the Access Fund, but the climbing community at large for all of your efforts and your commitment to representing the climbing community on Capitol Hill. So with that, we're going to end this episode. Thanks everyone for watching. Tune in for the next one. Take care, everyone.